Welcome to the debate. Today we're dissecting this massive vulnerability that I think is hiding in plain sight in almost every major logistical operation. We're looking at a system that effectively manages millions of dollars in hardware, trucks, fuel, high-end GPS, while managing the most volatile, expensive, and frankly dangerous variable using what? Sticky notes and gut feelings. We're talking about the blind spot of driver management.
It's a really jarring contradiction when you stop and think about it. I mean, you walk into a modern fleet office, and it looks like NASA control. You've got screens with real-time GPS, engine diagnostics, fuel consumption curves.
Right.
But then you turn to the manager and ask about the person who's actually driving the truck, their license status, their training history. And well, suddenly they're pulling out a dusty binder or an Excel sheet that hasn't been updated in a week.
Exactly. And the source material we're debating today argues that this disconnect is not just some administrative annoyance, it's a financial and legal time bomb. The core premise here is that the human element has become a liability, not because people are bad, but because they're completely unmanaged compared to the machines they operate. The text proposes a pretty radical shift, moving from a culture of trust and knowing your guys to a system of total centralization and management by exception.
Okay, and see, that's where I have to push back a little right away. I don't dispute the mess. Excel is a terrible way to manage legal compliance. We can absolutely agree on that. But the solution in the material treating drivers strictly as strategic assets to be optimized via algorithms, just like a fuel injector, that risks turning the fleet into a digital panopticon. My position is that while we need the data, the goal shouldn't just be control in a policing sense. It should be about a transparency that actually empowers the driver. If you reduce human behavior to a compliance checklist, you lose the very adaptability that makes a fleet work.
I understand the fear of dehumanization. I do. It's a natural reaction. But let's just look at the cold reality presented in the text. The material opens with a scenario that I think just destroys the romantic idea of the human touch. It describes a fleet that's perfect on paper. The trucks are new, the software is expensive.
All the hardware is there.
Exactly, all the hardware. Yet the fleet is bleeding money. Why? Because of the driver. And this is the critical insight that frames my whole argument. The text explicitly says it's not their fault. It's the fault of the tools. We are managing these incredibly complex legal realities with, human memory.
I agree that the administrative burden is heavy and human memory is a terrible hard drive. The text highlights specific risks, expiring licenses, untracked infractions. These are real costs. But the text frames this as a failure of the system. My concern is that your solution, this total centralization, it shifts the dynamic from a relationship to a surveillance state. You want to pilot the drivers like you pilot the trucks.
I want to pilot the risk. The material advocates for moving from reacting to piloting. Think about what that actually means. Right now, most fleet managers are just reacting. They find out a driver's license is suspended after the police pull them over. They find out a driver has a pattern of speeding after the crash. That's not management, that is firefighting. The only way to stop firefighting is to treat the driver as a data point that is just as visible as the engine temperature. If you don't know the status of your crew, right now you are gambling.
I see the logic of piloting, I do. But I think you're underestimating the value of that relational element. The text talks about transparency and confidence. A centralized driver file is incredibly efficient, yes. But if the driver feels like a strategic asset, which, let's be honest, is just corporate speak for cog in the machine, they're going to disengage. The ultimate goal here can be interpreted differently. It can be seen as removing friction. For example, making sure their premiums are paid correctly. That isn't about control, that's about fairness. It's about building a system that serves the driver, not just the manager.
All right, so let's test that theory against the first major concept in the material, because I think this is where the philosophical divide really opens up. The good driver myth. This is where the rubber meets the road. The text cites a sentiment heard in, 90% of companies? We know our drivers. It implies managers feel they have a personal handle on things. Oh, Bob's a great guy. Been with us 10 years, he's solid.
And often, Bob is a great guy. That personal knowledge is what allows a manager to know which driver to send on a tough route
or who can handle a difficult client, that isn't a myth. That's tacit knowledge. It's the glue holding the whole operation together.
It's a myth the moment liability enters the room. The material argues that this feeling collapses the second a serious accident happens. Imagine the scenario. Bob, the great guy, has a serious crash. The police investigate. Suddenly, the good driver myth just evaporates, because the data reveals Bob has 3 untracked infractions and his medical check expired 2 months ago. The manager didn't know because he was relying on knowing Bob. That good guy narrative does not hold up in court.
That's a harsh reality check, I admit. You can't charm a judge with, but he's a good guy.
It is devastating. The material emphasizes the silence that follows the question, how many of your drivers are driving illegally right now? If you're relying on the good driver myth, the honest answer is, I hope none. And hope is not a strategy. The text makes it clear. The personal touch is actually a barrier to professional management because it blinds you to the cold, hard data. You get complacent because you like the person.
I would frame it differently. The text says, and I quote, "The problem is not the competence of the drivers. The problem is the absence of a system." And that's a crucial distinction, I think. The good driver myth isn't about the drivers being dishonest. It's about the managers being blind. Bob might still be the best driver you have in terms of pure skill, but administratively he's a ticking time bomb.
But the result is the same. The company loses the lawsuit.
Legally, yes, the result is the same, but culturally, no. The text calls this administrative negligence. That puts the burden on the back office, not in the truck's cabin. My worry is that if we aggressively destroy the good driver myth, we swing too far the other way. We start treating every driver as a suspect until the algorithm clears them. We need to fix the blind spot, the lack of data, without blaming the driver for the manager's disorganization.
But fixing that blind spot requires the very tool you seem hesitant about. And this brings us to the second core point, the operational identity card. The material proposes a smart driver file. This isn't just a digital CV, it's a single source of truth. HR contracts, salaries, licenses, accident history, all of it.
It's a comprehensive dossier. It's essentially a digital twin of the employee.
And it is absolutely necessary because of management by exception. Now, this is the concept I want to drill into because it solves the scale problem. The text states clearly that no human being can manually track 30, 100, or 300 drivers. It's just physically, cognitively impossible to keep all those expiration dates in your head. You cannot know 300 people's administrative status.
I concede. The limitations of human memory. We are terrible at tracking dates. I can barely remember my own anniversary, let alone 300 license renewals.
Exactly. So, the system uses intelligence to generate alerts, a license expiring in 30 days, a driver with a sudden spike in infractions. The system tells you where to act, when to act, and why. That's management by exception. You stop drowning in the noise of 300 files and you focus only on the 3 that are flashing red. This is the only way to scale safety. You ignore the 297 things going right so you can fix the 3 things going wrong.
And there lies the danger. Management by exception is efficient, absolutely. It saves the manager from reviewing 300 files every morning. But let's look at the cultural implication. If I practice management by exception, it means I only interact with my driver when something is wrong. I only talk to them when the red light blinks.
You're interacting with them to prevent a disaster. That is the most positive interaction you can have. Hey, your license is expiring. Let's get it fixed so you don't get fired. That is support.
Is it perceived that way? Or does the driver just feel like the only time the boss calls is to scold them about a date or a point deduction? The text mentions this system leads to less subjective discussions. That sounds great for lawyers, but subjective discussions are often where relationship building happens. If we reduce the relationship to just exception handling, we lose that human connection. The operational identity card risks becoming a permanent record of errors.
I think you're reading too much emotion into a compliance tool. The text lists the results. Less legal risks, less accidents, less subjective discussions. Less subjective discussions is a massive benefit. We're not arguing about whether you were speeding. We're looking at the data. It professionalizes the relationship.
Professionalizes or sterilizes. But I will grant you this. Subjectivity is often a mask for favoritism. By having the facts, you might actually lower the temperature. If the identity card is accurate, it protects the driver from a manager who doesn't like them just as much as it catches the one they do like. If the data says I'm compliant, you can't touch me.
Precisely. It brings fairness through accuracy. Now, let's move to the third point, which dismantles another beloved fleet tradition: vehicle assignment. The text criticizes the, quote, feeling habit affinity method of assignment.
Ah, yes. I've always driven this truck, it's my truck.
Correct. And the material argues that assigning vehicles based on habit or affinity leads to real verifiable costs: overconsumption, premature wear, avoidable accidents. It pushes for traceability, knowing exactly who drove what and when, and assigning the vehicle based on the mission, not the driver's preference.
And this is where I struggle a bit. The text explicitly attacks affinity. But in the real world, affinity is a powerful motivator. If a driver loves their truck, they keep it clean, they check the oil, they care for it. Breaking that habit in the name of optimization might save a few percentage points on utilization, but it might cost you in morale. You turn the driver into a renter, not an owner. And we all know how people treat rental cars.
But the text argues that this ownership is an illusion that costs money. A bad assignment is a hidden cost. If you assign a vehicle based on habit, but that vehicle is the wrong spec for the route, you're just burning fuel unnecessarily. Furthermore, the text mentions traceability changes human behavior. This is crucial. When a driver knows that the vehicle is traced specifically to them, they behave differently. Accountability drives better behavior.
That I can't argue with. The text says the vehicle becomes traceable, the human behavior also. That is a profound shift. It moves from anonymity to accountability. If I know that any scratch on the bumper is digitally linked to my ID card, yeah, I'm going to be more careful. It removes that tragedy of the commons where nobody cares for the truck because it's everybody's.
Exactly. And if you're swapping vehicles for optimization, you need that digital traceability. We can't afford the sentimentality of my truck if my truck is the wrong tool for the job today.
Drivers aren't hammers, though, but I'll concede that avoidable accidents due to bad assignment are failures of management. The text makes a strong point that traceability protects the asset and the driver from false accusations.
Which brings us to the final piece of the puzzle, and maybe the most tangible benefit for the driver, even if you are skeptical of the rest: the automation of premiums and expenses.
Ah, the chronophagus task.
Chronophagus, time eating. It's a fantastic word from the text. I might start using that.
It sounds like a dinosaur, the Chronophagus rex.
In a way, it is a dinosaur. Calculating premiums by hand, counting miles, checking shift times, all of it is described as a source of conflict and just a massive waste of time. The text argues that automating these rules is the ultimate efficiency play. You suppress human error.
I actually agree with you here, but for a completely different reason. You see this as efficiency. I see this as the most human-centric part of the entire document.
How so? I mean, it is literally handing the payroll over to an algorithm. It's the definition of removing the human touch.
Yes, but think about it from the driver's experience. Nothing destroys a driver's morale faster than a paycheck that's short because the manager forgot to carry the one or lost a trip sheet. Manual payroll is it's ripe for errors, and every error feels like theft to the worker. It creates paranoia.
That is true. It creates unnecessary antagonism. The company is trying to screw me.
Exactly. By automating this, you are guaranteeing the driver that they will be paid fairly, accurately, and on time. The text says this leads to transparency and internal trust. That's the key. It protects the driver from the manager's incompetence. If I know the system is tracking my miles for my bonus, I don't see it as a policeman. I see it as an accountant working for me.
Huh. I can accept that interpretation. It aligns with my view that the system suppresses error. And whether that error hurts the company's bottom line or the driver's paycheck, suppressing it is a net positive. The text summarizes this as moving from administrative pain to automation. It turns a source of conflict into a background process that just works.
And that is a transition we should all support. It frees up the manager to actually manage to talk to drivers about safety and performance instead of spending Friday hunched over a calculator. That chronophagus time can be given back to the human relationship.
So looking at the big picture, we've gone from the good driver myth to the operational identity card, discussed management by exception, and the chronophagus nature of manual payroll. The text concludes with a very powerful, simple sentiment. The vehicle does not drive itself.
No, it does not. Not yet, anyway.
Behind every truck is a driver, and behind every unmanaged driver is a hidden cost. The material concludes that driver management can't just be a secondary HR module. It has to be a lever for security, compliance, and profitability. My takeaway is clear. A vehicle fleet is a precision machine. You cannot have the most important part of that machine, the driver, managed by feeling. You need the operational identity card and management by exception to survive. You have to close the blind spot.
And I think I come at it from a different angle. I agree the good driver myth is insufficient. We can't rely on a handshake and a smile anymore. But I believe the transition to this data-driven model must remain focused on the driver as a strategic asset in the truest sense. Not just a liability to be minimized, but a human being to be supported. The system can't just be about catching them doing something wrong. It has to be about proving they're doing things right.
That is a further distinction. The source material actually teases the next step, the augmented driver, where data and AI transform behavior. But for today, the lesson is foundational. You can't augment what you don't manage, and you can't manage what you can't see.
Precisely. You have to move out of the blind spot first. Once the data is visible, then we can decide how to use it, hopefully to build trust, not just enforce compliance. But you have to turn the lights on.
We hope this debate has illuminated that blind spot for you. The choice is yours. Continue with the silence of the unknown or embrace the rigor of the system.
It's about making the human element visible, manageable, and ultimately valuable.
Thank you for joining us on the debate. Until next time.
Goodbye.